Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I did a video about comic runs a while back, and you may have seen it. And you got to get some good response in the comments. A lot of people talking about it. I think the general consensus, though, is that generally speaking, people like longer runs, and they like consistent creative teams on those runs. I think that was pretty unified. Every now and then, I always do these videos, and somebody will come in with a contrary opinion of like, I don't mind it when a comic ends after 5 issues and has 3 different artists. Works fine for me. And I always wonder, it's like that Anchorman meme. It's like I don't believe you. I think you're here just to be contrarian. I think I have never met in all the time I've ran a comic shop, seen. Thousands and thousands of customers have come through the door. I have never met one that said, "Hey, this limited series of 4 issues. It was really nice that they changed the artist multiple times. I love it when they do that. That always makes me happy." Nobody says that. I remember when AVX came out in the store and they were changing the writers and the artists throughout that event. And everyone hated that. Not a single person came in to say, yeah, it's okay with me. Even though the artists that were coming in and out were all generally well liked. They were all big name, good artists. But Marvel, every single person wanted Marvel to pick a lane and stay with it, not bounce around. Like nobody said they appreciated that. Yet when I would see interviews, I remember going to Comics Pro, and some people from Marvel like, we know the fans really like that where we switched up the artist. Like, I no fan said that ever. No fan says this. If they do, they're lying. Anyway, I'm throwing it down. Anyway, here's a question about runs, but a longer one. So we'll go through this. It says, "Hey Perch, I have some questions about runs. Who sets up the runs? The publisher, the editor, the writer, the artist, or all of the above?" It's the editor is the answer to that. Who also decides to leave the run as well? There it is. The writer, the artist, or the editor is making that choice. Oh, by the way, I'm like bouncing around on this road. So here's Texas fills their potholes in the dumbest ass way. They like come and they just dump some asphalt onto the ground. They don't level it. It's not even to the road. It just creates a new obstacle course in this. And people keep saying, when are you gonna trade your Porsche out for a truck? And I'm like, I never. I like my car, and I think a truck would just handle this stuff worse. I have ridden a truck. I've driven a truck. I've ridden in a truck. I've driven a truck many times, and trucks definitely have their uses. Trucks are great, but I don't think making potholes invisible is one of them. Anyway, so sorry. We go back to the mail. Um, how long does a company, both Marvel and DC, let the artist and writer or artist writer been on the run? How long has the company? What Grunwald's run was like 100 issues. Claremont's run was over 100 issues. Bagley on Ultimate Spider-Man went on for a very long time. How wasn't that an uninterrupted like 100-issue run? I don't know. It was close to it, I thought. Anyway, Bagley did a very, very long run. It can happen. Generally speaking, it is if the budget is there, and increasingly the budget is not there, which is the problem. But if the budget is there and the artist is willing, and the company isn't luring the artist onto something else, or changing the rates around, or changing what can be spent on the book, or doing dumbass things like randomly deciding to double ship the book in the middle of the month, most writers and artists I've talked to would prefer a longer run. I've definitely talked to some artists who are like, yeah, I like to do about 6 issues, and then I want to do something new. I like to bounce around. That is definitely something people have said as well. But quite a few artists and writers would just prefer to have a long run. But what happens is the writer is told, hey, we're going to do 6 issues, and if that sells well, then we'll see what happens. Maybe do another 6. And so the writer starts writing for 6 issues. They start kind of paring down their ideas so it can fit in one arc. Unfortunately, the audience, the customers, tend to respond better when the creative team swings for the fences and does big things in their book, which they don't do when they only have 6 issues to really think about. And then on top of that, when the writer is kind of not really told, they're like, what kind of artist would you like to look at? I mean, would you like to work on this? And then the writer sometimes gives an opinion. That opinion is sometimes followed and sometimes not. Sometimes ridiculously not followed. Like I was talking to a writer who said, I really would like a Michael Mignola style artist on there, some dark, moody, a little bit more kind of that style. I know we can't get Mignola, but let's look for some people in that realm. And they're like, okay, cool, 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 cool. And then they put on a somebody who's got a almost a Joe Magera manga style on this, and you're like, what? You went exactly the opposite, so far the opposite of what I asked for. Anyway, this happens a lot, and I've had a number of writers come to me and forward me emails and say things like, "Is the editor just, pardon my expression, fucking with me here, or are they stupid?" Like I can't even the amount of, by the way, the amount of emails, the sheer amount of emails I get like that from creators who are like, I can't tell if my editor is being a prick or is really dumb. Which do you think it is? I play the game of dumb or evil a lot in comics. Is it stupidity? Is it evil? Can't quite tell. Anyway, back to the mail. The reason I ask this question is for the purpose of producing good products. Here are some examples of my main question. As a Marvel customer, I liked some of Chris Claremont's stories on his 17-year X-Men run, and when he was replaced with stories, they fell flat and sucked. When it came to the X-Men artwork, whether Chris was working with John Byrne, Frank Miller, Dave Cockrum, John Romita Jr., Jim Lee, and others, the legendary Paul Smith, am I right? Anyway, it never bothered me because it was cool and it matched the story. Another one on the artist side is when the late Steve Ditko left Spider-Man on his own terms, as the story goes, after being the original artist for half a decade. And when John Romita Sr. took over, it didn't look the same. Not to make fun of John's work on Spider-Man, another artist on Spider-Man run, Todd McFarlane, reinventing the character from making Spider-Man look more spider-like when he swings to changing so-called spaghetti webbing to enlarging the eyes on his mask. When he left to be one of Image's founders and when Mark Bagley took over Spider-Man, it almost looked like Todd was still in the title. I don't know about that. Bagley's style didn't feel like Todd, but he did redefine how the character was. Was Bagley? I would never call Bagley like Todd. I think Todd, for a while, Eric Larson followed Todd. I don't know if you remember that brief moment. And that one definitely looked like Larson was trying to kind of ape some of Todd's style. Bagley, I guess they kept the bigger eyes and they kept the webbing. I see where you're going with that. Had to think it through. Anyway, sorry, back to the mail. The point I'm making is that we as customers are a little spoiled thanks to the publishers. You can agree or disagree with me on that. We're used to seeing our favorite artists and reading our favorite writers. So when we as customers get a new writer and artist team from the publishers, people like me take a while to embrace them, not to take a shot or be too negative. That's fair. It's a fair point. I know that you're a very busy man. I'd like to hear your thoughts, email, video. So, okay, cool. I'm not a busy man. What, are you kidding me? I'm doing videos while I drive home. It's all good. I'm going to drive home, going to pet the dog, going to jump in the pool. That's what I probably won't do that last one because it's 50 degrees outside. Anyway, I don't. Okay, so a lot to unpack there. So if I'm getting your question right, I mean, first of all, the runs on comics are a lot more dictated these days by logistical business type reasons more than anything else. And that's a shame. I think I would argue that you will get a better, bigger business built up over time if you're letting the creative team stay consistent on a book. I think you start to get more reliable sales. I think overall it leads to good things if you just let the creators kind of settle in and do something long form. I think there's lots of financial analysis, and I've done some of these sales videos that prove it, that show that even a creative team that you may not entirely love, if you give them time on the book, if you let it play out, the sales will start to either level off or even in some cases curve up. There are some very distinctive examples of when the sales kind of rebounded and went back in the other direction. And it's because people get used to a certain creative team on the book and it starts to take on its own life. I think you saw that at different eras with Spider-Man, certainly with the X-Men. You've seen this occur. in comics, and it's a good thing. Unfortunately, for a lot of publishers, just to play it out and be blunt about it, the the challenge you sometimes get into is when a creative team's on a book for a long time, the creative team, realizes that they have some leverage, and they realize that, they're starting to create a pretty lengthy run, and that's valuable. And so the creative teams at times will start to not hijack, but they will start to demand, more. They'll start to basically say, hey, if I'm on this book for a long length of time, I deserve more money. All the reasons you want to keep me because now you're getting into a run. And I think a lot of editors are, increasingly sensitive to that. I think that they will work very hard to avoid getting put in that position, and that becomes a factor, unfortunately, to the whole mix. I think it becomes a pretty big negative over time for editors, because they don't want the customers to have that leverage. They want to be in control. So definitely that starts to play into things after a while. I think that, is that stupid logic? I mean, it's a give and take. I think that, as a publisher, you need to make sure that you're, remaining financially sound, that you're making decisions that are going to keep your company and your line viable, that you're doing kind of all the different things you need to do in order to, make a profit. So I completely understand why, you got to be careful with these kinds of things, and you do need to not put yourself in a position where you're going to be held hostage by the creators on the book. But in fairness, what I'm talking about has not happened that often. And I think the publishers are a little overly sensitive or spooked by the, perception that this could happen someday. I think it's weird to me, and I've done videos on this in the past, where in 2021 I'm talking to editors who are referring to the image revolution that happened in '93, right? '93. And they're saying, this is why we can't let artists do certain things, because they'll hold us hostage, and it could create a bad situation if we let this thing happen again. And I look at this editor and I go, when the image revolution happened, you were 2 years old. In one case, and the other person nodding your head vigorously, you weren't born yet when this happened. So, you're talking as if you lived through this very disastrous experience for the company, but the reality was you weren't born yet, and you were still crapping your pants, and maybe you still do. I don't know, no judgment, but this really isn't occurring. So, what are you really scared of here? What's really going on? That I'm very leery of these moments in comics. In terms of are people spoiled by long runs? I mean, somewhat. I mean, the one of the things that I do acknowledge, and I wish more of the fans, the customers, would also acknowledge this, is it's natural. It's very natural for us to, when we think about comics and we think about what we enjoy, and we think about what we're reading right now, you pick up a comic that came out this week, right? You pick up a copy of, I don't know, what you name your comic, just some random, like this month's issue of The Flash, sure. And in your head, if you've read lots of previous comics, it is human nature and natural that you start comparing the issue of The Flash you're holding in your hands, the one that's out this month, to the best Flash story you've ever read, the epic run, the one that is just the best comics. If you're picking up an issue of Spider-Man, you're like, well, here's an issue of Spider-Man that's coming out with the Beyond era, and they're doing stuff with Ben Reilly. And I remember when Todd McFarlane had Venom come and attack Mary Jane, and he had to go take him on. Like, that's not exactly fair to compare this month's comic issue to the absolute best titles that have ever been created for comics. It's if you're talking about, let's see, how does this month's issue of Batman stack up against Frank Miller Batman Year One? Probably this month's Batman is not going to be as good as that. It is, but that's natural in reading. You're going to have your favorite moments of all time in a comic, and it is natural that you're going to compare the current comics against the best moments ever that you read in that comic. And if the comic has a 50 or 60-year run, it's virtually impossible for this month's issue of the comic to be the best you've ever read. So I mean that's fair. It's important to keep that in mind as we're reviewing comics and thinking about comics, that you have to have some perspective. Now, in fairness, it cuts both ways. The comic you're reading this month in your hand should also not be the worst comic you've read over the last 60 years. And I think that sometimes happens as well. So I think, based on sheer number and odds, the comic you're reading right now should be neither the best nor the worst that you've ever read. So is it living up to that? It's up to you. Anyway, thank you very much for the question. To the question, I don't know. I'm all talked out at this point, so you're probably listened out. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for listening.